In this session, we're looking at the journey to becoming a non-exec director. So I'm going to start by essentially how all four of you see the role of a non-exec director today.
I do a variety of roles, primarily in the not-for-profit pro bono arena, so my remarks are going to be contextualised around that. And I feel four primary responsibilities for the roles that I hold. The first one is around offering constructive challenge to the executives of the organisations. The second for me is around bringing the outside in, offering an external perspective. The third thing for me, again, relates to the technical specialism that many of us share, and it's around being an expert at the table in marketing comms matters. And the fourth and final point, before I bore everyone to tears, is about representing stakeholders of some fashion, depending on the organisation.
We have two things. One is to make sure that the strategy for the organisation is right, which is everything that you've just been talking about, Leo, around what that looks like, but to ensure that the strategy is robust and it's the right strategy for the market and the opportunity right now. And then secondly, which for me certainly as a CMO is really interested in ensuring the correct governance of the organisation, which is where it gets really serious as a NED, because you're legally accountable for the organisation's performance and success. And some of the things that we can get wrong in the organisation involve jail terms.
I'd like perhaps to bring the perspective of an advisory board when you're doing not-for-profit work, which can be an incredibly enriching form of being a non-executive. And my role as the chair is actually to facilitate the dialogue and ensure the balance of voices at the table across people who are doing this really for free in their spare time and just out of the interest of giving back. And still, at the same time, making sure that that dialogue is purposeful, it's focused and it's sharp, and allowing all the different voices and perspectives to really be heard and contribute.
I know as marketers we're very, very close to the regulatory side of things because we need to make sure we're compliant, obviously, in terms of our campaign execution and communication strategies. But I think taking that a level further and talking about liabilities, and you really, really do need to sort of tighten your view on that. So I suppose the other thing I'd add is a really nice comment around support versus challenge. I think on the soft skills side of things, it's about how do you ask the right questions of the people in the rooms and sort of make the link between maybe what we talked about in the strategy side of things, what the emerging risks are, what the competitors are doing, the industry overall.
And you've worked with some pretty big tech vendors, Avanade, Dimension Data, BT. What can these roles do for you in terms of your own professional development?
I think for anyone that's thinking about doing a NED role, this is such a critical point to think through in terms of what are you personally going to learn, as well as what do you have to give. And I think for me, there's been a couple of learnings and things I'm still learning, to be honest with you. But it is this transition from an executive where really our responsibility is to get stuff done, to set the strategy, and then really to make sure that strategy gets executed and that we hit the KPIs and that we are delivering against, the business growth, et cetera, et cetera. Whereas that shift to non-exec is everything we've been talking about, which is you have to unpick yourself and unattach from execution. And that for me has been the biggest learning, because I think certainly in marketing we're such doers. We envisage the future and then we actually make it happen.
So I guess the message I wanted to give is start somewhere and don't be afraid to start small. I think most people, when they think of a non-exec role, they want to be at Coca-Cola or they want to be at IBM or whatever. And that's great if that's what you want and what you can achieve. But I found the route in was to start with something where I could contribute, where the risk was negligible. I mean, these were child-run companies. They weren't listed businesses. But starting with that simple, uncomplicated, unregulated, lacking in fiduciary responsibility role was my route in.
The biggest challenge of being a non-exec?
Definitely, being able to step out of the detail and asking the right questions. I think challenge, obviously, is you are learning new subject matter, especially if you really jump industries. And you don't have a training period. There's no probation period. There's no sort of soft landing. It is from your first meeting, you need to be all over it and asking the right questions, which I think is quite fair. So I think, I think it's probably just that massive sort of learning at the beginning that I found the biggest challenge. And maybe ongoing it is, there's interesting things happening in this company and you do want to be more involved in what they're doing in this particular area. But, as we've probably said a couple of times today, you can't. But then you also need to know enough to be able to help, guide the strategy on that. So that's definitely something that kind of gets played, that dynamic in the boardroom a bit, where you can kind of go a little bit down a wormhole, but then, you sort of pull it back fairly quickly. So I'd say that's probably what my challenges are.
Somebody said to me, being a good non-exec is like, you need to be able to stick your noses in, but keep your fingers out. And I think that's really resonated with me. The other important thing is, even though you may be hired because you bring that customer brand, digital lens that nowadays boards find very valuable and they don't have, when you're sitting at that table, you need to be able to contribute just like every other board member. And so a majority of the board life is not around strategy. It is around risk committee, remuneration committee, audit committee, nominations committee, and therefore really being willing to put in the time to learn about those aspects, including developing yourself in your own roles and paying attention to risk and risk management is really important. Actually, my chair, when he hired me, he said, I'm going to put you on the risk committee. It's not very sexy, but it's the best way to learn about the business. And so if you have an executive risk committee in your businesses where you work, ask to join and be exposed to that if you're not already exposed to it. I think it makes for great development and preparation for being a NED.
What advice would you have for the audience today who may be thinking about stepping into a non-executive role for the first time?
It's about being authentic, knowing why you want the role, knowing what you can deliver, knowing what your motivations are, and making sure you only look for roles that align. There's no point in going for a pro bono role if you want money, and there's no point in going for money in certain organizations if actually what you want to do is good for society. So figure out what your motivations are, figure out what you're trying to achieve, be honest and transparent about those with the people you meet, be authentic, and that's the best way of ensuring you end up in the right place.
I think just for me, one small thing I'd add is speak to your current employer, not just to sort of get involved in the current committees that are there, but just to understand what boundaries exist when, if you were to be successful in getting a role. There can be so much time wasted if you're sort of out there and talking to chairs and whomever, and then you find out it's potential conflict or, they're not comfortable with X, Y, and Z. So obviously just understanding that. And it might be obvious because there might be hopefully other execs who are doing the same thing or potentially not. So I think, that's probably where I'd start.
I think I would say don't underestimate the value that you can bring. And, coming from someone that's worked in marketing my whole career, I think this is the era for us on boards, whereas traditionally boards have looked for lawyers and accountants. And, I think now there's a great opportunity to bring that customer mindset, the digital mindset, the data mindset. And I think most organizations are really crying out for the skills we've got. So don't undersell yourself and go for it.
And on that vein, be selective. I know, when that brief lands and when you get approached and it's the thing you want to do, it's very tempting to just maybe want to jump in. But the selectiveness, I think, is understand the type of company and the expectations, because what they really want is deeper executive involvement, and that's going to be the case for smaller companies, VC funded, etc. Well, that may be right for you. You may have the capacity to do that, but you may not. And the other thing is the chair and the culture that the chair is creating around the table is so important, especially for a first-time NED. You really want somebody who believes so much in the value that you can add that are going to make the room and the allowance for your lack of experience. And they'll welcome that as a sign of diversity on the board. But not every chair is like that. Not every board is like that. So do your due diligence, be selective, and don't be too impatient. It'll happen because, as Ruth said, you're going to be hotcakes because really, especially CMOs that are in tech right now, it's your moment.